AMD finally updated their H264 encoder, all the way back in March. So why haven't I covered it? Tons of tweets from you all, multiple articles recently posting about this update. Thanks for the shoutouts, by the way. So why did I stay quiet all this time? Well, mainly because you can't use it still, and the improvement is marginal. But the journey to find this out was an interesting one, and I discovered someone else updated their encoder beyond what I possibly expected. So we have a lot to talk about. This video was sponsored by NordVPN. Get 2 years plus a bonus month at a heavy discount at the link below. Real quick, let's go over how encoders work. There's the hardware side. There's physical silicon, usually in the form of ASICs or fixed function chips, that physically handle the encoding and the decoding of video. The performance and thus the quality that can be achieved of these chips change with new GPU generations, and this makes the most impact on improving video encoding quality. That's why Nvidia's H264 quality mostly stayed the same until the Turing 20 series GPUs, where they improved the physical NVENC chips on board and quality leaped quite a bit. AMD has seemingly just not touched theirs on the consumer side at all. But then there's the software side. Hardware manufacturers, AMD, Intel, or Nvidia in this case, provide SDKs, development software, that allow software developers to use to implement the encoder into their apps, like OBS or FFmpeg, for instance. Those manufacturers can continue to iterate on and improve how the SDK works, add new features or presets, and so on, to improve performance and sometimes improve quality a little bit. The SDKs are implemented on the user side for program access via GPU driver updates. We saw this when Nvidia partnered with the OBS developers to implement the new, the updated SDK they launched with the RTX cards to not only add new features and things like that required to achieve higher quality on those RTX cards, but also added some pretty significant performance improvements on the older cards as well. That's what we're looking at today. Back in March of this year, AMD updated the AMF, Advanced Media Framework SDK, for their video encoders and decoders. In this update, the big noteworthy thing was that they finally added support for B-frames, a feature of the H.264 codec that some consider very important and seemed to be how many explained why AMD's video quality was so poor compared to everyone else's. I showed in 2020 during my last round of just full encoder quality comparisons that AMD's H264 encoder had barely improved at all, if any, through the generations, and paled in comparison to both NVENC from Nvidia and QuickSync from Intel. And it was just often worse than the lightweight X264 presets that most streamers would probably be able to use on their CPU. It wasn't great. So did this update help? Well, yes, but also no, not really. I think I know why though. But first, what is a B-frame? This is a kind of annoying question to answer, as there's so much compounding encoder documentation to dive through just to really understand it, but I'm going to make it pretty simple here for you to get. H.264 compression makes video files so small because it doesn't actually encode every frame of video. Instead, it looks for movement in the scene and makes guesses about, what should be where and what pixels need to be updated, and only really encodes that part of the image at a time. That's why when you have too low of a bitrate, such as on a Twitch stream, or too much movement, such as from a fast action game with, say, a first-person camera, you end up with a ton of blocking and artifacts. There aren't enough bits to assign to each frame, and too much movement to encode it all at once. To do this guessing and limiting process, the encoder uses different reference frames. Reference frames are either the full image or guesses on what's changed. There's two main types of reference frames. The key frames, also called iframes, not to be confused with the key blades, and then the delta frames, or the frames that have only parts that change between those keyframes. Keyframes or iframes are the entire image. Think of it like a screenshot of the video in that moment. They're still limited by the bitrate being used to encode, but they contain all of the information that would be in the frame at that point in time. No missing information. The delta frames then are used in between keyframes and just have the parts or that, change or move in between each instance of a keyframe. With enough bitrate, you could have every frame be a keyframe and have effectively no messy compression. This is called all-I encoding. Plenty of cameras record this way. But trying to do this in a low bitrate live stream would mean just far more pixelated blocky mess rather than having some of the image preserved. There's a few different types of these delta frames, including B-frames. The B in B-frames stands for bidirectional. Most delta frames, such as P-frames, only look to the previous frame before it to figure out where blocks of the image are moving or should move. B-frames can refer to and interpolate from frames before and after it, as well as looking at 2 or more frames in the first place. This looks for redundancy, both in space on the frame and through time, and can have a big impact on reducing data use throughout the rest of those frames. But since it's referring to frames at different points in time, it requires a buffer to reference those future frames rather than going 100% linearly, and it requires special implementations to really work well. This is a really in-depth topic. I'll have more reading about it linked below if you want to really dive in and try to continue down the rabbit hole. Though, all of this leads back to the question that was repeatedly asked when the Nvidia encoder updates released. How many should you use? In OBS, you can use up to 4 B-frames in the options for NVENC, but more isn't always better. I captured fresh, lossless 444 samples at 1080p 60 of some video games and ran them through NVENC, QuickSync, and AMD AMF H264 encoding with 3 different bit rates and the different B-frame combinations to see which is the best for each encoder and how the encoders compare to each other. It's worth noting that I don't cover all of my samples here, as I have a more just kind of massive encoder analysis of the year coming after Nvidia and AMD released their new graphics cards, as doing it beforehand would kind of be wasteful. But this is a good starter as we lead into Intel's AV1 encoder in the next video. All of my samples and data are available to download for Nebula subscribers if you want to dig in. Let's look at some nerdy data. I tested 3 different bit rates for 1080p 60 footage, 3.5 megabits per second, 6 megabits per second, and 8 megabits per second to test commonly streamed formats. I didn't go lower because 1080p just shouldn't be used as a resolution if you have to go that low, and I didn't go higher as you hit diminishing returns for encoder differences at all past 8 megabits per second anyway. But these represent, normal Twitch streams. YouTube streams already get recompressed anyway. I used Netflix's Video Multi-Method Assessment Fusion, or VMAF, to analyze the video quality of compressed copies of the footage versus the lossless footage. This is now the industry standard for truly determining quality difference based on how a viewer would actually perceive them versus just, noise ratios and things like that. I did test other measurements such as PSNR and SSIM, but they are honestly not super useful for this kind of thing, so we're just focusing on the VMAF data here as it's far more reliable. When compared against utilizing 0 B-frames, the use of B-frames in AMD's AMF encoder provides 2 to 4% quality improvements at lower bit rates, such as 3.5 megabits per second, but only 1 to 2% at most once you start hitting 6 and 8 megabits per second. This is an improvement, and a free quality bump for AMD GPU users if it ever gets implemented everywhere else, but it's not revolutionary. It gets more interesting when we open up to the secondary question of how many B-frames should you use, as I tested all of the different combinations. The current AMD driver only allows for a maximum of 3 B-frames to be used, which is interesting given that both Nvidia and Intel can use up to 4. But regardless, in every single encode at every bitrate level, the best quality result from AMD was using only 1 B-frame. In most, but not all tests, 2 and 3 B-frames were still a quality improvement over not using them at all, but limiting the encoder to only using 1 resulted in the best quality. I also observed that another option made a big difference in quality here. The AMD encoder gives you an option between 3 motion estimation modes to determine where pixels are moving. Full pixel, tracking things at the size of a full pixel, half pixel, and quarter pixel. Most H264 encoders primarily tend to use half pixel motion, but quarter pixel wins out sometimes here. My results are literally split 50-50 with regards to whether half PEL or quarter PEL, which is pixel estimation, is best performing, depending on the game. And it's consistent across all bit rates, whether a game does best with half or with quarter pixel estimation. But the difference is, I can't iterate enough that the differences are still not huge here. So then, knowing we see a small but present quality bump on AMD's encoder, how does it stand in 2022 versus H264 encoded on Nvidia GPUs or on Intel iGPUs? Well, the numbers are all honestly reasonably close these days, especially at higher bit rates, but Nvidia's H264 encoder is still outperforming AMD's by upwards of 5% in most cases. At 6 and 8 megabits per second, even NVENC's worst performing settings combinations score better than AMD's best. It's not until we drop to 3.5 megabits per second, a very low bitrate for 1080p as it is, where NVENC and AMF really start trading blows here depending on the game. But we're talking less than 2 total VMAF score points worth of difference across the board here anyway, which isn't a lot. This also reveals a pretty significant diversity in which settings actually produce the best results from Nvidia's side. While 1 B-frame was the best no matter what for AMF, for NVENC it completely varies. 0 B-frames performs best for all of the samples at 3.5 megabits per second for NVENC, but at 6 megabits per second, 2 games looked better with 2 B-frames, 1 with 0, and then 1 with 1 B-frame. What a weird variety. And then at 8 megabits per second, most games had the best results with 1 B-frame, but one game looked best with 2. It seems the trade-off of the extra bandwidth that the B-frames can eat up for themselves versus this, that whatever they free up for other frames down the line is kind of hit or miss with each game here. Similarly, it was a constant back and forth trade of whether utilizing Lookahead with NVENC, a feature added in that RTX adjacent update I mentioned, performed best here, with the differences between it being on or off often being quite marginal. Most interestingly from all of this testing, I thought at least, was the revelation that Intel has been quietly updating their QuickSync H264 encoder continuously over the years, beyond what most people I think kept track of. I teased during my original 12th gen coverage that it was really good these days, but consistently on almost every test combination, QuickSync outperformed NVENC by 2 to 6% quality improvement depending on bitrate, with a similar scenario of even the worst settings combinations in QuickSync still scoring higher than Nvidia's best in most cases. And just to note, 3 B-frames seems to be the sweet spot for QuickSync, with 1 sometimes performing better, but 3 was generally the best, at least most consistently. Quantitative measurement doesn't tell the full picture, however, and in motion, the differences in these encoders becomes much less noticeable. We're talking much smaller gaps in the VMAF scores than we had before anyway. This is awesome. The fun takeaway here is that all 3 are in a great spot compared to before and performing quite well considering, but bitrate limitations matter way more here than encoder usage, and you should be streaming in the highest bitrate you can as allowed by your internet connection and the streaming platform that you're streaming to. The differences sometimes just come down to different priorities in the encoder's philosophy. Sometimes a scene looks smoother and less blocky in one encoder, but it also looks less sharp, while another encoder might have more blocking, but you get a clear kind of feel for the detail in the image. And then sometimes the AMD encoder just looks blurrier and blockier than the other two, and that's just how it is. Thankfully, we don't have to wait very long for things to change, as Intel already has GPUs with AV1 encoding, a new open source video encoder that is promising to be even more bitrate efficient. I have one in hand, and we'll be covering it in the next video, so get subscribed. I'm mostly left with one question here. Why did AMD release this update? Clearly, it's not a big push for them, as literally nothing an end user can even use has implemented the update. OBS doesn't have it, FFmpeg doesn't have it, Handbrake, which is just really a GUI for FFmpeg, doesn't have it. I had to use some obscure Japanese GitHub build of the encoder designed to be a plugin for some other Japanese program I've never heard of to even try it out at all, which is part of why I haven't covered it yet. Actually, I just wanted to cut in and say that you can build OBS with a more recent and patched in version of FFmpeg that you'd also have to completely compile from scratch yourself and then use the StreamFX plugin on that custom build to utilize B-frames, but that's ridiculous. Don't do that. So why, then? Well, while it's a nice show of effort to see that AMD still has engineers who care about video encoding, I get the feeling that this was just more prep work for whatever next generation of graphics cards AMD is supposed to be releasing this year. Much how Nvidia revamped their SDK when they released the new major encoder update with the 20 series Turing graphics cards, expectations are set that AMD will at least support AV1 encoding with their next generation of GPUs, which does mean a silicon change, which could mean H264 improvement too. But given that Nvidia is at least happy to sit on their pile of 30 series Ampere cards and wait to roll out their new GPUs, AMD probably isn't dropping theirs right away either. So for now, AMD users are just kind of stuck in last place again, hoping AMD starts to care about streaming at some point, with Nvidia and Intel both releasing high quality video encoders and cool, background removal tech and things like that. AMD has some ground to make up when it comes to streaming and content creation, and the PR surrounding that for those users. Doing all this video encoding and testing is fun, but it uses up a lot of bandwidth and data, especially getting all these samples uploaded for you all. And every time I do these kinds of projects, I end up getting my bandwidth throttled by my ISP. Meanwhile, I'm getting thermal throttled by this freaking heat wave. Whew. I promise the tank top videos will end soon. There are clearly high points when everyone's at home watching YouTube and movies online at the same time that my ISP starts limiting what I can upload with. But with NordVPN, that is no longer an issue. NordVPN is also upgrading to co-located and 10 gig servers, meaning that we'll all have even faster browsing experiences, and plus all of their server nodes are diskless, meaning that they don't store any of your configuration or your data on site, which is very important. You can even route your traffic through a second VPN server for double the encryption, if that's your thing. I've been using NordVPN to stay secure online and to keep from getting throttled since moving into our new house, Well, at least to keep from getting bandwidth throttled at least. You can try it out with a 30-day risk-free money-back guarantee and get a 2-year plan plus an additional bonus month at a massive discount at nordvpn.com/eposfox. They can't protect you from the heat, unfortunately, though. Stay safe out there, y'all. I still have tons more encoder data to share, both in the AV1 video and in the big encoder drop later this year. So don't worry, but in the meantime, check out this playlist if you want to, see how these encoders compared and stacked up in the past, or check out this video if you want to, find out how to start improving your audio for your videos as well. I'm the Stream Professor, and remember, be kind, rewind.